before the California Board of Psychology. The agency case number is 6002-022-000-965. The OAH number is 2023-100-121. Today is November 2, 2023. This matter is proceeding at the Sheraton Gateway Hotel in Los Angeles, California. The matter is before the board members. My name is Dina Galley. I'm the administrative law judge assigned to sit with the board on this matter. Dr. Coley, since you're representing yourself, I want to give you a brief overview of the process, and then we'll begin. So the Office of Administrative Hearings is an independent agency. It either sits for or sits with boards to assist them in resolving conflicts such as the one that's involving yourself. The hearing itself is divided into 3 parts. Each party has an opportunity to make an opening statement. You don't have to make an opening statement, but if you do, please remember this is not the time to give evidence because you won't be under oath. So what an opening statement is to give an overview of the evidence you intend to provide. It tends to be more helpful when it's a very lengthy hearing, multi-day or multi-week, and there are many witnesses, many exhibits. So it gives the fact finders here today, the board, the opportunity to kind of see what's coming. But anyone can give an opening statement. I just remind you, if you do kind of launch into your testimony, I may stop you. I'm not being rude. I just don't want you to have to repeat everything again under oath. So that's why I'll be stopping you. The next stage is the cases in chief. Ms. Walton, as the representative of the people, will go first. She'll present the exhibits that are here in this binder and that have been given to the board members. If you have an objection to an exhibit entering the record, meaning it'll be part of the information that the board will consider in making its decision, let me know. It usually doesn't come up in petitions like this because it's your evidence. But if for whatever reason you have a concern about something going into the record, tell me as it's introduced by Ms. Walton, and I'll make a ruling. At the conclusion of that, Ms. Walton, you're not expecting any witnesses, are you? All right, so then it'll be your turn. You can present your own testimony. If you have other people that you want the board to hear from, you can present them as well. You'll be allowed to just proceed by narrative because you don't have an attorney to question you. But after that, Ms. Walton may have questions for you. The board members may have questions for you. I may have questions for you. So that'll be that opportunity. And then at the end, there's just closing statements. If you saw the hearing before this one, it's just an opportunity to give a summary of the points that you feel are the most important for the board members to remember and consider when they are making their decision. So as you can see, there's kind of a protocol to the process, but it's not intended to be anything other than user-friendly. If you have a question about the procedure at any time, let me know. I can't give you legal advice, but if it's a question I can answer, I will. Do you have any questions now?
No.
All right, thank you. So I'll begin by asking Ms. Walton, do you have an opening statement?
I do, thank you.
All right, go ahead.
This is Deputy Attorney General Christine Fryer Walton appearing on behalf of the people of the state of California. Before the board today is Petitioner Fatima Cooley's petition for early termination of probation. Specifically, petitioner requests that the 5-year period of probation imposed upon her license, which is currently set to expire on October 11th, 2025, be terminated now. By way of background, in 2016, petitioner's license was placed on probation for 5 years pursuant to a stipulated settlement entered into between herself and the board. The stipulated settlement resolved a statement of issues the board had filed in response to her application for licensure. The statement of issues alleged that on or about April 13th, 2005, petitioner was convicted by way of a plea of no contest to violating Penal Code Section 487, Subdivision A, grand theft, a felony. Specifically, while working as a bank teller, petitioner had knowingly processed fraudulent withdrawals for an individual posing as a customer in exchange for monetary compensation. By the criminal court, petitioner was ordered to serve 180 days in jail, placed on 3 years of formal probation, and ordered to pay fines, fees, and penalties. Pursuant to the stipulated settlement with the board, pursuant to the decision of the board in this case, which was adopting the stipulated settlement, petitioner admitted the charges alleged in the statement of issues and agreed that her license was subject to denial. She further agreed to be bound by the board's probationary terms as set forth in the board's decision. In addition to a probationary period of 5 years, those terms also included a psychological evaluation, a billing monitor, payment of probation costs, and that the probationary period would be tolled during any periods of non-practice. In petitioner's case, her probationary period has been subject to significant periods of tolling. Specifically, the evidence in this case will show that though petitioner's 5-year probationary period began on May 26, 2016, over 7 years ago, her probation was tolled for almost 4.5 years of that time. As such, though the decision was effective in 2016, her probation will not be completed until October of 2025. The burden here today is on petitioner to prove by clear and convincing evidence that her probation should be terminated early. As set forth in the board's disciplinary guidelines, it is the petitioner's responsibility to provide the board with sufficient evidence to establish that it will be safe for consumers if the petition is granted. The petitioner must show that she is sufficiently rehabilitated and competent to safely practice psychology. In order to determine whether this high burden has been met, according to the board's disciplinary guidelines, the board shall consider the criteria set forth in California Code of Regulations, Title 16, Section 1395. Specifically, the nature of the underlying acts that led to the discipline. Secondly, any acts of petitioner subsequent to the discipline being imposed that could be grounds for denial of a license. Third, the time that has elapsed since the commission of the underlying acts. Fourth, the extent to which the applicant has complied with any terms of parole, probation, restitution. And finally, and perhaps most importantly, evidence, if any, of rehabilitation submitted by the applicant. The evidence presented today will demonstrate that in evaluating these criteria, petitioner has not met this high burden of proof. Accordingly, in the interests of justice and on behalf of the people of the state of California, at the conclusion of this case, the Attorney General will request that the petition for early termination be denied and that petitioner be required to complete the remaining 2 years of her probation. Thank you.
Thank you. Dr. Cooley? Do you have an opening statement?
I don't have an opening statement.
All right, thank you. All right, so we are going to be going into recess for 45 minutes for a lunch break off the record. We will return at 1:40. Doesn't have to be on the record. Did I say it correctly? Introducing your documents. Go ahead.
Right here. So I'm going to go through a list of exhibits that I would like to mark and offer into evidence. The first document has already been marked as Exhibit 1, and it is the certificate of licensure that was issued to Dr. Coley.
All right. Any objection?
No.
The license certificate marked 1 for identification is admitted.
Thank you. Exhibit 2 is the certified statement of issues in case number 600-2014-000687.
Any objection to this exhibit?
No.
Statement of issues marked 2 for identification is admitted.
Thank you. Exhibit 3 is the certified decision and order in the same case number just read.
Any objection?
No.
The decision and order marked 3 for identification is admitted.
If I can do the next exhibits collectively, exhibits 4 through 11 are the petition for early termination of probation submitted by Dr. Cooley and all of the supporting and attached documents.
All right, so Dr. Cooley, these are the documents that you presented as part of your petition. Do you have any objection to having them considered for your petition?
No.
All right, 4 through 11 are admitted.
Thank you. Exhibit 12 is the certified probation report. I could mark and offer it into evidence.
Any objection?
No.
The probation report marked 12 is admitted.
Exhibit 13 is the certified probation profile for Dr. Cooley. If I could offer that into evidence.
Can you just explain what this is, Ms. Walton? It's a very lengthy document.
This is the probation file that the board has maintained for Dr. Cooley. Since she's been on probation, it contains probation reports. I should also mention that we have submitted that this document be filed under seal. I can address that in a moment. It has her psychological evaluations contained in there, notes from her therapist regarding her progress. It shows what has occurred while she's been on probation.
All right. And I assume sometime in your closing, you'll point out to what's most relevant, since the board members will have to consider this in the course of their deliberations.
That's correct. Yes, I
All
will.
right. Okay, thank you. And you wanted this sealed because it contains patient information?
It contains petitioner's cell phone, I believe her social security number is in there, her email address, it has her psychological evaluation, some notes from her therapist, so I would like to seal the entire document for her privacy protection.
All right. Do you have any thoughts on that, Dr. Coley? Are you all right with it being, in other words, it can't be released subject to a Public Records Act request? It's
I'm
not
okay
a
with
public record.
Yes, I'm okay with that. I'm in
All right.
agreement with it.
And do you have any objection to having this document placed into evidence?
No.
All right, so the probation profile marked 13 for identification is admitted.
And finally, the notice of hearing as Exhibit 14.
Any objection?
No.
So the notice of hearing marked 14 for identification is admitted.
If I may, Your Honor, I understand that petitioner has a document as well that she provided me with a copy of yesterday.
All right.
That she
How many
want
copies
to
do you have?
introduce.
I believe I have 7.
Okay, that's a little short, but maybe we can share. Oh, you received it?
I have 4 more copies. Well, actually,
well,
I will
there-
keep one for myself.
It
but
sounds like the board members received it by email, so if you could just bring me a copy.
Okay.
Would anyone like a hard copy? Okay, Dr. Sheet over here would like a hard copy. And this is a letter from Dr. Lance Lenford. This is a character reference letter, is that right,
Yes.
Dr. Coley? All right. Any objection to having this included in the record?
No.
All right, I'm going to mark this as Exhibit A, as petitioner's exhibit, and it is admitted. Anything further, Ms. Walton?
No.
Thank you. All right. Dr. Coley, how would you like to proceed? Do you want to testify? You want to
Yes,
let the board know your story? Okay.
yes.
Let me begin by placing you under oath. Please raise your right hand. Do you swear or affirm, under penalty of perjury, under the laws of the state of California, that what you're about to say is true and correct?
Yes.
Thank you. All right. So you can go ahead and you can start wherever you like, whatever you think the board members need to know about you in terms of your background and what occurred. We're not here to relitigate the matter that created the issue with your initial licensure, but you can explain just briefly the context for that and also what's happened since then. Go ahead.
Okay. In 2005, I processed fraudulent transactions for a customer impersonator, and I knew that they were fraudulent. I was a bank teller at Washington Mutual at the time. Upon being questioned about it, I took full responsibility. At the time, I was in a not the greatest relationship and felt pressured and threatened to do something that I should not have done. And I wish that I would have spoken out and spoken up about that situation that I found myself in. But besides the point, I took full responsibility then for my actions. I'm extremely remorseful for what happened. It's not like me to find myself in a situation like that. I've learned a lot since that transpired in 2005. I am a dedicated mother, daughter, sister, in pursuit of my dreams of becoming a licensed psychologist. I'm currently working as a psychological associate, and I've, through everything, been able to remain employed. It has been challenging at times with trying to gain employment or get my clinical hours due to my conviction. I continue to take responsibility for my actions. I know what I did was absolutely wrong, and I lacked judgment. And for that, I've been able, through therapy, to work through and gain insight and self-awareness into my actions, my vulnerabilities at the time. I've been able to just identify ways of setting boundaries and not being afraid, to speak up and speak out and ask for help. Since then, like I said, I've been gainfully employed and working towards, I did complete my hours. I'm studying right now and hopes to be licensed. I've taken the test twice, and I'm focused and I'm hoping to pass it the next time I take it. I did want to know if it is okay to address the issue of my registration being tolled for 4.5 years. At the time when I applied originally for a registration number, I did have a psych assistant position offered to me through the process of trying to obtain the number after my initial application was denied. The employer moved forward with someone else, and at the time I also was able to gain a pre-doctoral internship with LA County Department of Mental Health, and they did not require me to have a registration. And so when that happened, I moved forward with the opportunity of being able to get my pre-doctoral hours. After graduation, I did attempt to earn my postdoctoral hours and try to use the number. I was met with a few challenges. I've heard a lot more no's than yeses when trying to apply for psychological associate positions, and that can be discouraging at times. I'm just going to be honest, it was very discouraging. So I kind of let it go a little bit. I went back to being employed with LA County Department of Mental Health as a medical caseworker. And then I was able to obtain a position with Center for Discovery, where I was able to complete my postdoctoral hours. And that was in 2020 when I was initially hired. And so that was some time after I was initially granted the registration, and I reapplied to the board and informed them that I did have an employment opportunity and a supervisor that was willing to take me on with a probationary number. So I just wanted to speak to why there was such a lapse in time as to it being toiled. Since then, I've met all of the requirements of the Board of Psychology as far as my probation agreement and stipulations. I went to therapy in 2007, and that was on my own. So, 2006, sorry. 2006, my conviction was in 2005. I was able to process my feelings and my shame. I had a lot of shame around what happened and my actions. In 2021, I believe the recommendation was for me to go back to therapy, and I did that with no problems. And I was able to continue to process my feelings around my actions, but also work on building insight and self-awareness. Since then, I am actively involved in my church, and I volunteer with Project Angel Tree every year. That is an organization that gives back to children that have incarcerated parents for the holiday season. I have not been in any other criminal trouble since then. And at the time, it created a really difficult challenge for myself and my family and my parents, but I've since then repaired my relationship with my parents and my family. My actions did bring a lot of shame and disappointment, but I can say that today we are definitely stronger and connected. Not only that, I have a 7-year-old son that I'm responsible for, and I strive to set an example to him about belief in self, faith, hard work, and determination, and that he inspires me every day to make sure that I continue on my path of becoming a licensed psychologist to provide a stable and loving home for him. It is also my motivation to make sure that I never find myself in a situation that I found myself in 2005. And that's all I have for now. Thank you so much for giving me this opportunity. I'm grateful to the board that I was even given a probationary number. This has been a huge life lesson, and I'm extremely grateful. No matter the outcome of today's decision. I've learned a lot, and I'm proud of myself. And I look forward to being able to continue to work in this field. I am dedicated to providing mental health services. I'm very passionate about the work that I do. And I made a promise to my grandmother that I would see this through no matter what. And I stand before you asking for grace, but mostly to say that I'm extremely remorseful, and I've learned a lot throughout this process. And I'm appreciative to the board for the opportunity to even do what I've dreamed of doing since I was in high school. So thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Coley. Thank you, Dr. Coley. Do you need a break?
No,
You're okay? All right. Ms. Walton, do you have any questions for Dr. Coley?
I do, thank you. We admitted exhibits 4 through 10 into evidence, which are your petition for early termination, right? Did you prepare these documents yourself?
yes,
Did anybody help you?
no,
And are the statements in them true?
Yes.
And you signed your petition under penalty of perjury, correct?
Mhm.
Thank you for explaining the circumstances of the tolling of your license. I still want to talk just a little bit about that period between 2016 and 2020. You were working as a caseworker for the Department of County Mental Health, is that right?
LA County Department of Mental Health.
During that time, were you participating in any continuing education coursework?
No, I completed the ethics course that I was told that I had to complete with the board, and then whatever trainings that were offered through my job.
And when did you obtain your PsyD?
I graduated in June of 2017.
Okay, so while your license was pulled,
Yes.
you completed your education. Between 2016 and 2020, were you doing any volunteer work?
I'm volunteer with my church.
And can you talk a little bit more about what you were doing for your church?
I volunteer with Project Angel Tree. That usually happens around the holidays. It is a program that seeks out children that have incarcerated parents. We provide gifts for them. We also do around Thanksgiving a Thanksgiving basket. And so I was active in collecting things, and I always pick a family every year for Project Angel Tree.
Thank you. You mentioned that after the conviction in 2006, you participated in some therapy, is that right?
Yes.
Do you know for how long?
For approximately 6 months.
And what led you to enter therapy at that time?
I couldn't really afford it. I didn't have health insurance, so I was paying out of pocket.
I'm sorry, not to terminate, but what got you there?
Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't hear that. What I was dealing with at the time, I was in my master's program. I had the conviction. I was dealing with a lot of shame around that. My relationship with my family was strained, and I felt like it was best for me to go to therapy to work through what I was experiencing.
Did the master's program that you were in have any requirement about participating in therapy?
They did.
And what was that requirement?
I don't remember that requirement. It could have been for the semester.
And so did the therapy that you were doing in 2006, did it count towards that requirement?
It did count.
Okay. As part of the terms of your probation, you had to participate in a psychological evaluation, is that correct?
That is correct.
And you did that in July 2020, is that right?
Yes.
If I could direct you to Exhibit 13, and if you'll see in the lower right-hand corner, these exhibits have what's called a Bates number that starts with AGO, and I'm looking for AGO 000124. You could just let me know when you're there.
I'm there.
Have you seen this document before?
A couple of weeks ago.
When I sent
When
it
I
to
was,
you?
yes.
Okay, so prior to that, you hadn't actually seen your psychological
No, I was
evaluation?
told that I couldn't receive a copy of it.
Okay. And is it your understanding that the evaluator recommended you for therapy.
Yes.
And you testified that you did enter therapy again. How long did you do therapy for the second time around?
I believe it was for 5 to 6 months. Not the exact. I think it was from March 2021 to July of 2021.
Did you return to the therapist you had seen before, or did you see someone new?
I saw someone new.
Did you agree with the evaluator's recommendation that additional therapy would be beneficial for you?
I wasn't opposed to it.
And why did you stop going to therapy after that 5 or 6 months?
She agreed that we had met our treatment goals, and so we terminated therapy. And outside of that, again, it was for financial reasons. She did not accept insurance.
And how often did you see that therapist?
Weekly,
For how long? Like, how long each session?
it was for 50 minutes.
Have you participated in any follow-up psychological evaluation since the one in July 2020?
No, I have not.
What about a psychiatric evaluation?
No, I have not.
I'd like to talk a little bit more about your employment since having your license reinstated in July 2020. You are currently at, are you still with the Center for Discovery?
No, I was laid off due to lack of work, and they have since closed that location that I was at. Treatment enrollment decreased, and I was laid off.
And you worked there, what was the time frame that you worked there?
I worked there from November of 2020 until February 1st of 2023.
And what did your job duties consist of?
I was a primary therapist initially when I was hired to do individual, group, and family therapy for our patients that were seeking treatment for eating disorders. And so I facilitated groups, sat on meals because we had meals with them. So we'd either have breakfast, lunch, or dinner, depending on the schedule with clients.
And where are you currently working?
I currently work for Reborn Wellness. I like to say before I was laid off at Center for Discovery, they had promoted me to like a senior position. So I was a clinical director, although I was not providing any type of supervision to anyone. It was just being the more senior person in the office.
And did you have any role in billing at the Center for Discovery?
No,
And how about at your current job?
no.
And what are your what are your duties at Reborn Wellness?
I am a psychological associate, so I provide individual therapy to patients.
What kind of patients do you see?
I mainly see patients that are diagnosed having major depression or anxiety, stress, or maybe they having some adjustments, difficulty adjusting to life stressors, or dealing with grief.
And how many hours a week are you currently working?
I currently work about 10 hours a week.
10?
Mm-hmm.
Do you have any other employment, or are you just working 10 hours a week right now?
I'm just working 10 hours.
And how much were you working prior to the layoff from Center for Discovery?
40 hours a week.
40 hours a week. If your probation is terminated, how do you anticipate that that will change your work?
I believe that I would be able to gain hopefully another position that offers more hours. The issue that I continue to run into is usually I'm offered a position, and then when I explain that I have a probationary number, the offer is rescinded. And so I believe that not having a probationary number will allow me to obtain full-time employment in the field without issue of having the probationary number.
Aside from the recent layoff with the Center of Discovery, have you been employed essentially full-time since you've been on probation?
Yes.
If your license is taken off of probation, do you have any intention to become involved in billing?
No.
Is there anything else that you would like to add at this time about your rehabilitation efforts since you've been on probation?
Nothing else to add. I feel like I was able to work through a lot in my psychotherapy that I had this past time as well. So I don't have anything else to add about my rehabilitation. I've managed to stay focused. I know it's not enough to say that I haven't been in any more trouble. It was an isolated incident, but I do attribute that to being rehabilitated and focused on my goals. Nothing else to add.
Do you think the therapy was helpful to you?
Absolutely.
How so?
Just one, being able to work through the shame, reflecting on what led me to even be in that position, working on more self-awareness and insight and setting boundaries has been tremendous to me. It was beneficial the first time I went to therapy and this past time. And so I feel like I've grown. I don't feel the shame that I used to feel. Again, I know what I did was absolutely wrong, but I don't have the shame, and I'm not embarrassed to talk about it. And before I was extremely embarrassed, and I'm not embarrassed anymore.
And so for the past several years, while you've been practicing under your psychological associate registration, you've been subject to additional oversight by the board through a billing monitor and having to check in with your probation monitor. If that additional monitoring is lifted, how can you assure us that you won't present a danger to the people of the state of California?
I've built really great relationships with my past clinical supervisor, Dr. Jennifer Henretti. I feel confident that I can reach out to her. With my current clinical supervisor, we have a great deal of rapport. I have friends and colleagues, and so I feel very confident that I can go to people and talk to them if anything should come up. I feel like I have a great sense of community, not only just in the field, but also amongst my family and my spiritual advisor.
Thank you. I have no further questions at this time.
Thank you. Dr. Kasuga, do you have any questions for this witness?
I just have one question.
Go ahead.
Thank you so much, Dr. Colley. What type of patient population do you intend to work with?
I would really like to work with underserved communities. That's what I did mainly when I was with the Department of Mental Health. Formerly homeless, at-risk youth is who I worked with mostly. I would like to continue to work with underserved communities.
How does your experience in the past and from what you've gained this insight through therapy inform you with regards working with the population that you intend to work with, if any?
I think just having my own lived experience in working through what I worked through in therapy, being able to have compassion for my clients and meeting them where they're at, I think it's informed me, especially the population that I like to work with. I think that it will just add to me being able to support them more in the therapeutic setting.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
I don't have any other questions. Thank you.
Mr. Fu?
Thank you, Dr. Coley. I want to go back to the psychological evaluation that Ms. Walton brought up that was done in 2020. I'm curious what has changed since 2020 that has allowed you to speak about your past behavior without embarrassment? Because the psychological evaluation talked a little bit about how you were embarrassed and didn't reveal everything. What has changed in the last 3 years that has allowed you to gain further insight into what happened?
I would say what changed is a lot of self-forgiveness. Just being able to forgive myself, being able to work through what happened, realizing the situation that I found myself in, and now having more awareness that I don't believe I would find myself in that situation again in life. But I would say mainly forgiving myself has allowed me to not feel embarrassed anymore. That's mainly it. It's something that I did, and if I could, I would take it back, but I can't. And so I think self-forgiveness and allowing myself that grace, and I hope that people extend me that grace, but that's really what it is.
And how did you arrive at this self-forgiveness independently, given you mentioned cost being a limiting factor for continued care? I'm curious what was the process that you went through to gain that self-awareness so that you could reach this point?
I'm a spiritual person, so I had to remind myself, I have to forgive myself. If I'm asking for God to forgive me, I need to forgive myself. If I want others to forgive me, I also have to forgive myself. So it was a lot of that, as well as what I worked through in therapy, just leaning on my faith and my spiritual beliefs and knowing that I could beat myself up forever about it, but it won't change it and it won't help. And so I had to ask myself, now what? I can beat myself up forever, and what will that do? It will not change the past. But how do I learn from this, and how do I move forward? And so that's, I feel like, what has truly helped me is knowing that I had to forgive myself, especially if I was praying and asking for God to forgive me, wanting my family to forgive me. There has to be some self-forgiveness as well.
And did that include talking to perhaps the leader of your church or to elders in your spiritual community? Or was that a self-reflection process with the faith?
It included a little bit of both, definitely self-reflection, but I do have someone at my church that I talk to, and we've worked through some things, we prayed, and so that is what I got from our interactions about this and our many, many conversations about what happened.
And over the last 3 years, what's the frequency of your church attendance, if I may? Or what does practicing your faith look like, and how often do you practice your faith?
I attend church pretty regularly. I'm a member. Can I say where I'm a member at? Matter.
I'm sorry, we can't hear you.
Oh, is it okay to say where I go to church, or no?
I see no reason why you can't.
Okay. I attend Faithful Central Bible Church. I attend church, I want to say, at least 2 to 3 times a month. It just depends on if I'm feeling too tired. But I attend church regularly. I'm active in my church. And so I've always been that way. I grew up in church. And that's what I know.
Switching a different set of questions. When you were at the Department of Mental Health, did you have to track your hours to different projects? So you were on a multidisciplinary team. Was that built to measure age funds? Did you have to track your hours based on the grant funding for the team, for your work there?
Not at the time. I worked a full service partnership program, so the FSP program, which I believe was built through Medi-Cal. We did have billing, but we just put our notes into the system. There's a completely different department that deals with that. So our biggest thing was getting our notes in within 24 hours.
And during that time period, were there any instances where your supervisor indicated that the notes that you provided were inaccurate or that misstated the type of work that you were billing Medi-Cal for? Not billing, but that would constitute some sort of Medi-Cal work for the county to be reimbursed?
No, I never received any type of counseling on my notes. I think the biggest concern was making sure that they were in on time, but I understood what we could bill for and what we could not bill for. I had worked with DMH since 2013, so I've been pretty familiar with documentation and what's billable and non-billable.
And there were no issues with your documentation?
No issues with documentation other than making sure that I got it in within the 24 hours. Sometimes I was not within the 24 hours, but we worked full service partnership. We're often out in the community providing services and responding to crisis calls. So I think that was the extent of, if there was an issue, it's your documentation is not in within 24 hours.
Thank you for your time today.
Thank you.
No further questions.
Thank you. Dr. Phillips?
I don't have any questions.
All right, thank you. Dr. Tate?
Hi there.
Hello.
Thank you for coming before the board. I just have one question. Is there anything you aren't currently doing that you feel would be beneficial to your professional development?
I would like to attend more trainings. I've had trainings on trauma-informed care. I would like to be certified as an eating disorder therapist, just based on the experience I had at Center for Discovery, which financially right now, I'm not in the position to do, but that's really my goal is to, once I get done studying, is to focus on trainings.
Okay. Would you, so in the initial psych eval, they recommended doing another one in 12 months. Would that be something that you would do as part of that list?
I would do it. I wasn't aware that that was something that was recommended initially.
Okay. Thank you. No further questions.
Dr. Rogers?
Hi, Dr. Coley. Thank you so much for being here. I just have one question. It's related to the psych eval. It's on page AGO 000138. There's a statement here from the evaluator that says this. It says, however, I question, given her lack of insight into her own situation, whether she is likely to be able to provide effective psychological intervention to her patients. I found that interesting, and I was just curious if you could talk a little bit about your approach to working with clients and helping them to develop insight into their own struggles, challenges, what they're working on, given this perspective in this report.
Yes. In my work at Center for Discovery, we used a lot of CBT, a little bit of psychodynamic interventions. I often allow the clients to kind of process what they're going through and what's coming up for them. And then I work to kind of reflect and help them to see, different perspectives, different ways of looking at things. Self-validation is really important. Digging deep, really kind of going deeper than just kind of surface level things. What's coming up for them? Is there any ties to what maybe they've experienced in their childhood, and how is that being coming up or being projected now in their relationships or the situations that they may be dealing with?
Okay. That's all I have. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right, Dr. Sheets?
Thank you. I thank you very much for being here and being so sincere in your approach, sharing your experiences and reflections with us. Oh, you can't hear me. Thank you very much for being here and being so sincere in sharing your reflections with us. I have one question. If you had somebody as a therapy client and they talked about possibly considering doing something similar to what you were accused of doing, how would you help them, recognizing, there's the self-disclosure piece and maybe, and not necessarily, just what, could you share with us how you might respond with that client?
Yes, definitely want to highlight the pros and cons, right? But also I think that I would use a little bit of self-disclosure, having went through something like that. I would not want them to go down that path. I know the consequences of it, and so I think it would be that. It's really exploring, if you do this, what's the likely outcome of your actions? What will that be? How will it impact you? How will it impact your future? And a little bit of self-disclosure, excuse me.
Thank you.
Ms. Rascati?
Yes, I just wanted some clarification on when you did go to therapy, because at one point it sounded like you went on your own, but then at another point it sounded like it was also part of the master's program. So I just wanted clarification on that. So you did go to therapy on your own, or was it always part of something else?
It was a part of the master's program, but when I chose to go, I didn't have to go at that time. It was just as long as you did it before you graduated. But having experienced what I experienced, I chose to do it then. But it was a part of my program.
Oh, okay. So it's basically like it was part of the program, but you needed it at that time, so you could have
Yes.
waited. Okay, gotcha.
Yes.
Okay,
Yes.
okay. Thank you. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Since you don't have an attorney here to question you, I would have asked at this point if the attorney would like to have you elaborate on anything that you've discussed in response to the board members' questions. So I'll give you the same opportunity. If there's something you want to embellish or explain, this would be the time.
Sorry, I'm nervous. But I think just to reiterate, I've learned a great deal from this process. Although therapy was a part of my master's program, it was much needed. And even this past time going to therapy, it was extremely helpful. I have no hesitation of going back to therapy should I need it in the future. I absolutely believe in the transformative power of therapy. I believe in the work that we do. I think that's it. Thank you.
Anything further, Ms. Walton? Anything you wanted to ask?
I do have a follow-up question. In 2005, when you were convicted, where were you in your education?
I was in my master's program, I believe first semester in my master's program.
And that was a master's to get what degree?
It was a master's to get a degree in clinical psychology, but at the end I ended up just getting a degree in psychology. It was challenging to get an internship, so I have a master's degree from Antioch University in psychology.
Okay, and you were working on that while you were working at the bank?
When I was working at the bank, I was an undergraduate student at Loyola Marymount University, and right after graduation, I no longer worked there due to the incident, and then I was convicted in 2005.
Thank you. I have no further questions.
Thank you. All right. Is there anything more you'd like to present, Dr. Coley, before we proceed to closing statements?
Nothing more.
All right. Since this is your petition, you should proceed with the do you have a closing statement?
Yes.
Go ahead.
I would just like to say in closing, one that I'm, as I expressed before, extremely remorseful for my actions. It is completely outside of my character. Anyone that knows me knows that that is not who I am. My family was completely floored, actually, when I found myself in this situation. And I would just like to say, as I've shared before, that I'm not the same person that I was at 20. I'll be 41 this month, and I am different. I've changed, and through the trials and the ups and downs and the many no's, I've still remained very determined. And so I think that this has taught me patience and perseverance. And like I said before, I'm extremely grateful to the board for the opportunity to even have a number. And I'm hopeful that I can move forward in my career. Everything that I do at this point is to provide, like I said, a stable and loving environment for my son. And I'm very grateful for this opportunity to speak before you all today, although I'm extremely nervous. But thank you so much.
Thank you, Doctor. Ms. Walton?
Thank you. In closing, petitioner agreed pursuant to a stipulated settlement with the board that in exchange for being issued a registration as a psychological associate and being given that opportunity, that she would be on probation for 5 years. And that during that time, she would be subject to additional oversight to ensure that she is safe to practice and fully rehabilitated. To terminate that probation now, Dr. Cooley is faced with a high burden under the law, a very high burden of proving by clear and convincing evidence that she's ready now, as opposed to in 2 years when her probation will terminate naturally. Turning to the criteria that are set forth in Section 1395, Dr. Cooley has not met that high burden to terminate early. Turning to the nature and severity of the underlying acts, they were very serious in this case as a felony conviction for grand theft. And the public arguably puts no greater trust in any set of professionals than its psychotherapists. And it is absolutely essential that full rehabilitation for honesty and integrity be ensured for the sake of the people of the state of California. Turning to her acts subsequent to discipline being imposed, by all accounts, petitioner has done well on probation. Probation has been good for the development of her career. She's obtained promotions. And there's nothing additional that there's any evidence of that would be grounds for denial of a license. But the time that has elapsed since the commission of the underlying acts does not weigh in favor of petitioner. Here it's been substantial. However, the psychological evaluator who evaluated her just 3 years ago raised some serious concerns at that time about the level of insight that petitioner had into the circumstances that led to her incurring a felony conviction. And 15 years had passed at that point. So 15 years went by and a psychological evaluator still identified concerns. And I would urge the fact finders to review that report to the extent that they haven't already. And not to mention that also when this report was generated, petitioner had already been on probation. Granted, had been told, but for 4 years. This came, in 2020, really not that long ago. And I think that the concerns of that psychological evaluator need to be taken seriously. And one of those recommendations was a follow-up psych evaluation, which hasn't occurred yet. The next criteria are to the extent that petitioner has complied with probation, which, as mentioned, it appears that she has not committed any violations of probation. and the evidence of rehabilitation that she's submitted. And in turning to the evidence of rehabilitation, compliance with probation is not sufficient. Rehabilitation requires more. And as we sit here today, she's barely 3 years through the 5-year term. When she submitted her petition, she had barely completed 2 years. And given the facts presented in this case, on behalf of the people of the state of California, the Attorney General's office would like to see petitioner complete her term of probation to ensure public safety, and that the petition today be denied. Thank you.
Thank you. Dr. Coley, you actually have the last word. So if there's anything more you'd like to say, something for the board members to think about when deliberating over your case, this would be the time.
Speaking to the conviction, I did want to say that I met all conditions of my probation as far as the court was concerned. I even requested that the court extend my probation so that I could pay full restitution to the victim, and that was done, and I was able to get my record expunged. And yes, I have been compliant with the terms of this probation. I understand the concerns that were outlined in the psych evaluation. I did want to highlight, I was never informed or given a copy of the psychological evaluation. I did not know that it was recommended that I have a follow-up psych eval in 1 year. That was never told to me by anyone. And I think that that was all. I just wanted to say that
All right, thank you very much.
Yeah.
This matter is now deemed closed. The record is closed. We're off the record. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello, thank you. The board will meet now in closed session pursuant to Government Code Section 11126C3 to discuss disciplinary matters, including petitions for reinstatement, modification, or early termination, proposed decisions, stipulations, and remands. So thank you. This is the time the board will remain in the room and everyone else will excuse themselves. We intend to return to open session. We have a few more agenda items. So, thank you. Hello? Hello, welcome back. Mr. Pogue, can you please call the roll?
Kasuga. Boo. Harpsheets. Phillips. Scate. Rogers. Tate.
Here.
Roll is complete.
Thank you. Quorum is established. We're going to jump right into agenda item 16, which is the Outreach and Communications Committee report and consideration of and possible action on committee recommendations. 16A is a strategic plan action plan update. Ms. Sorick, please.
Hello, everyone. Included in your meeting materials is the strategic plan update. And just a note that we will be having strategic planning in Burlingame on December 7th and 8th. This will be an in-person meeting. So if you would like continuing professional development credit, please plan to attend in person in Burlingame. We also, just a note, this is the last strategic plan update for the current version of the board strategic plan. And what we have in the materials is an update on the action plan, which lays out ways in which the board is meeting the goals and objectives that were identified in the previous plan. So I am available for any questions the board or the public may have on the strategic plan update.
Any board comments or questions? Wait.
SFO?
Yes.
Thank you for the important question, Dr. Phillips. I'd like to open up this item for public comment. If you do have a comment, please come forward and have a seat, and the microphone will be turned on for you. Thank you. 16B, the social media update. Ms. Sorick.
Okay, also included in your meeting materials is the social media update. This is the tracking of our Facebook and Twitter site, and as well as the YouTube views of our board and committee meetings. And I am available for any questions.
Any board comment or questions regarding, oh, yes, Mr. Fu.
Ms. Sorick, granted that due to the changes on the websites, we're unable to now actually get further detail. I'm curious, would it be helpful to reducing workload, and if my fellow colleagues agree, to just remove that section on social media, or only report out the relevant social medias where you do have data for, so that we're not just compiling reports for the sake of compiling reports?
Are you suggesting shortening the report to hitting a bullet point or two, or do you feel like the social media information is not relevant at this time?
I think given that we're not able to
Get the information.
the report itself becomes, but it's actually a question to all of us here as like, do we find the report that we're not able to track this information anymore actually helpful, and would it be helpful to actually reduce your workload that you don't have to do this anymore because we don't have to, and until, does that?
I think to the extent where the limitations on the analytics for the likes and the followers over time, which we don't capture here, we're just relaying what we do capture. But if what we are capturing, maybe the background can be removed from the memo, just to not confuse things. But if there's information that's reported data-wise that's not really helpful or relevant, we can make those changes if it's not useful.
Yeah, and I obviously will defer to the chairs of the committee as well, but I think the other question I would have is related to this section specifically, and recognizing a lot of demands on your time, is what does knowing that we have 1,100 odd folks following us on Facebook add to our value in terms of the discussion when we have 22,000 licenses? So, right, are we going to have goals? Do we have a goal that says we want to have 2,500 Facebook followers? And so you're telling us we have 1,100 followers currently, recognizing we have a delta of 900 to go to get to 2,000. I'm asking this question because I'm mindful of a lot of the different reports we ask of you all the time, and I'm questioning if this is helpful information at this time, if there aren't any goals associated with the data.
So I'm going to turn this around back at you, Mr. Fu, because that's what I do. So we have strategic plan coming up, and I think that is a great idea to incorporate into the outreach section of our strategic plan, is to have some kind of a performance measure or goal, so that we're not just reporting data, but we're reporting it from a meaningful place. So if the goal is to expand the number of followers that we have on social media, for example, and we want to meet a certain goal, that's something we can follow up with the action plan that has a measured goal to it. But if you can kind of make a mental note to yourself to have that be part of our discussion during the outreach portion, I think that's something that may be helpful and get us through that piece of the strategic plan, if that makes sense. Because it's always been something that we just report out, but I agree, it's not necessarily meaningful data if it's not tied to something, yeah.
And for the record, and I will say this at the strategic plan too, which is, I'm not, I think the question, I would take it back to see, like, do we want even a metric for this? Like, what's the value added for this? And I'm one of 9, so 8 of my colleagues may feel differently and would see this information as crucial and important. I was asking the question mainly because of the Facebook and Twitter analytics changes, and it takes time to put together. So that's all.
Thank you for your comment. Any other board comment on the analytics or the social media update?
I would argue that, just to answer your question, I don't know if it's rhetorical, but like, I think since we have consumers that are in social media, any board of psychology present in those platforms will be part of that. If it's something where we can put some of the information for consumers and for them to be familiar with the board, and
Certainly, yes. Then I think that becomes a question of, is the information we're receiving demonstrated that? So, like, based on what you've just shared, I'm not necessarily of the mind that knowing that we have 1,000 folks is advancing our mission of consumer protection because it's 1,000 likes, right? So, like, out of 40 million Californians, 22,000 licensees. So again, I think that becomes a metrics question, but and that's a separate discussion for at SFO. We have a chair of the committee, and we have folks who are in strategic communications that are far more knowledgeable than I am, and I'm one of 9, and I think that's a question that I was asking. Like, are we is what we're asking reflecting what you just said? And I'm not sure at this point that is necessarily the case if we want to continue dedicating our resources to
It
that.
sounds like a valid conversation for the strat plan meeting.
yes, and I agree that I think that the strategic planning meeting would be a good venue for all that.
Raise your hand.
Or at one of your committee meetings.
And that as well.
I mean, I don't know that the whole board needs to discuss this topic personally.
On behalf of the outreach committee, we would be happy to take this topic up. Go ahead, Mr. Scott.
We did talk a little bit about it in our meeting, and part of it was going to the strategic plan. So, and part of that is also kind of acknowledging that this, I don't know how to phrase this, but I mean, there is not a lot of effort on it, and that's why the numbers are so low. But part of it is, but part of having the numbers and having information on these platforms is also visibility, to show that we are trying to reach the public. But in the strategic plan, we do need to acknowledge that more effort needs to be made on what's posted and how many things are posted and tracked.
Thanks for your comments, Mr. Scott. Any other board comments? Dr. Phillips? No. Perfect. Let me open it up for public comment on social media analytics. Please come forward and have a seat, and the microphone will be turned on for you. Okay. Thanks to the board members. Moving on to item 16C. This is the website statistics update. Ms. Sorek.
Also included in your meeting packet are the website statistics, and I am available for any questions the board may have.
Any board member comments or questions for Ms. Sorek? Mr. Fu, it sounds like you. Go ahead.
Is this an appropriate time to ask a question about legislative advisories as the part of the website update? Is that considered part of the website update?
Sure, I think so.
So the question I would have is, based on the views to date information for legislative advisories, which, by the way, Mr. Polk, thank you so much for the weekly updates that you provide every Friday. It is it's like the thing I look to on a Friday afternoon, actually, is a coffee and that. So thank you for doing that. And so I'm curious, like, when we look at this information, clearly there are items that are jumping out and others that aren't. And how are you taking the views to date information and utilizing it? And the answer could be save that for December at SFO. Or And again, it's a larger question. Reporting this information at the bill level, I mean, is a lot of work, I would assume, to just put it into a chart, pull that information. So I think the question I would have is, how do we take this information to make it useful? It's not being used in a meaningful way. We're not trending going, oh, this 19 clicks, for example, on AB 1428 means this. Then I think it's a question for the outreach committee or the strat plan about making these numbers, making sense out of these numbers.
Having the statistics mean something pertinent for the board. And it sounds like another good suggestion for December. It sounds like any other board members who have comments or questions regarding the website statistics? Perfect. I'd like to open up public comment for this item. This is website statistics update. If you have a comment, please come forward and have a seat. Thank you. Item 16D is the update on the newsletter, and the most current newsletter is in the agenda materials, and the winter newsletter should be coming out in December. And thank you to Dr. Rogers for your amazing and lengthy article. I love it. Any other comments, Ms. Sorick, for that item?
No other comments here.
Perfect. Any board comment regarding the update on the newsletter? I'd like to open up this item for public comment. This is agenda item 16D, update on newsletter. If you have a comment, please step forward and have a seat. Perfect, thank you. We're moving on to 16E, outreach activities update. Ms. Sorick?
Bless you. Included in your meeting materials is the outreach activities update, and I would just like to take this opportunity to thank CPA for giving us a booth opportunity to have our staff present. I was just speaking with our new CEO of CPA here. And we were discussing dispelling the big bad board kind of reputation we have apparently built for ourselves over the years, and our goal is always to be approachable as staff, and not to speak for the board members, but I'm sure the board would like that reputation as well. So any opportunities we have for that, we really appreciate. We attended the CPA convention in September and the Los Angeles County Psychological Association convention in October. We have Ms. Chung and Ms. McCochran who both attended those meetings, and appreciate your attendance and your participation and access to licensees and applicants at both of those venues. So exciting outreach opportunities, and once our fees are aligned with our revenue, our hope is to attend ASPBB. And now that we can travel to half the country, that is an opportunity for us to actually attend ASPBB. So that's also exciting. What came up at the outreach committee was attending consumer organization meetings as well. So we have staff looking at opportunities for that. So I'm available to answer any questions the board may have.
Any board comment for item 16E, outreach activities update? Dr. Kasuga.
I just wanted to echo that I think it was great to have a booth at CPA. I think that it provided a lot of information. It makes a difference when stakeholders are able to ask board staff direct questions. Like when I was applying to be a licensee, I was like so scared to call the board, and there's just a lot of kind of like misinformation out there. So I think it's good to put friendly faces to the board, as well as I think that the psychologists out there, we were able to talk to some, and hopefully we can get a lot more people interested in becoming experts for the board as well. I think talking to the other psychologists in those types of setting we can foster their passion for the field and for the growth of the field, and making sure that our field is at its highest quality. So hopefully that will encourage more people to help with experts.
Dr. Phillips?
Yeah, I just wanted to say, I had an opportunity to attend the luncheon at the LACMA convention, so I stopped by to see Ms. McLaughlin. It was wonderful to see they'd brought all sorts of material for them, and much wiped out by the time I made the table. So clearly people were stopping by and picking stuff up, and there were QR codes or barcodes for people to be able to access information on the website. So I just wanted to say what wonderful ambassadors they made for the Board of Psychology.
Any other board comment? Perfect. Oh, Dr. Harpsheet, jump on in.
Adding to what Dr. Kasuga said too, and Dr. Phillips, because I was at the San Diego CPA one too. And they were wonderful ambassadors. And Mr. Burke was there too. And there was one other person who was there who was, I think, an enforcement analyst. And so it was just nice to have somebody from each of the different areas that people could talk to, and everybody seemed friendly, and it was great. So like you say, it really does help to counter that big bad reputation.
I didn't know we were so big and bad, but we're dispelling it. We're dispelling it slowly. Let's open up public comment for this item. This is the outreach activities update. If you have a comment, please step forward and raise your hand. You got to raise it so he can see. But hello.
Hi, I'm Scott Parker. As I said, I'm CPA's new CEO. It was great to have all of you in San Diego, and something that in talking to my colleague Elizabeth Winkleman, who I know you all know, we'd like to extend that offer going forward at any of our events for sure. To as I start working closer with Antoinette too, to make sure that we coordinate where we're together, so that we can have conversations that do what they need to do for us going forward and dispel many maybe misconceptions that are out there. But I just want to introduce myself and look forward to meeting and getting to know all of you going forward. Thanks.
Thank you for your comments. The Board of Psychology's always closely worked with CPA, so welcome and congratulations on your position.
Hi, I'm Dr. Andrea Davis. I'm a longtime licensee, and I just want to say I'm also a member of CPA. How exciting it is to hear this access and friendly availability. And I wondered if that's going to be part of the next sort of strategic planning part to be built in, because it seems really important to me that the Board of Psychology feels more accessible in terms of socializing our psych associates and younger psychologists into the profession. If they could see and get to know you on a regular basis at these sorts of events, I think that would help them to feel more engaged and interested and connected to what you all are doing. So I heartily support a future plan of becoming available and knowable in these formats. So thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Davis. Last outreach item is 16F. This is the review barriers to telehealth survey and identify next steps. Ms. Sorek, would you like to introduce the item?
So I'm just going to kind of review the memo that is included in the meeting materials. In 2020, a pandemic and nationwide protests regarding racial inequities have highlighted the need for the Board of Psychology to consider, bless you, how it conducts business and how that impacts the profession of psychology and access to psychological services. As such, then Board President Seiran Fu and Outreach and Communications Committee Chair Dr. Leah Tate agreed on the following areas of focus: update on continuing professional development regulations, implementation plan to produce written materials including cultural diversity and social justice requirement, increase stakeholder engagement, engage Department of Healthcare Services regarding Medi-Cal reimbursement rates, engage substance abuse and mental health services regarding federal initiatives addressing equity, and addressing the digital divide. How does the digital divide impact access to telehealth? On June 26, 2023, the board conducted a Barriers to Telehealth survey. This survey was a follow-up to the e-digital divide. The surveys were sent to 30,000 consumers and providers of telehealth. The survey was closed on July 24, 2023. The initial goal of the survey was to share the survey results to an organization that would write a white paper, which would include policy recommendations based on the survey results. The board reached out to both the University of California and the Little Hoover Commission. To date, no interest in a white paper has been expressed by either organizations. In September, the Outreach and Communications Committee met, and the following committee recommendation is included in the memo. And this is to review the survey results and assign topical areas for each standing committee of the board to review, including but not limited to review competency requirements for doctoral programs, training settings, and supervised professional experience for the licensure committee, review compliance concerns in light of telehealth requirements, including HIPAA, BMP Code Section 2290.5, and California Codes of Regulations Section 1396.8 for the Enforcement Committee. Engage in partnerships with stakeholders such as APA, ABSI, AASPBB, CPA, and the Trust regarding practice standards and best practices for the Outreach and Communications Committee. And last, provide insight from survey results for purposes of the board's strategic planning session in December regarding telehealth and future practice issues.
So we're going to make 4 motions based on the recommendations of the Outreach and Education Committee, or Outreach and Communication Committee. And that would be to assign to the Licensure Committee the task of reviewing competency requirements for doctoral programs, training settings, and supervised experience within the context of the telehealth survey results.
I'll second that. Any board comment on the motion? Perfect. Any public comment on the motion? Please come forward, have a seat. Okay, back to the board. Any other board comments on the motion? Mr. Polk, can you please call the roll?
Kasuga. Fu.
Aye.
Harpsheets. Phillips.
Aye.
Riscate.
Aye.
Rogers.
Aye.
Tate.
Aye.
Motion passes.
Thank you.
I'd like to make a second motion, and that motion is to assign to the Enforcement Committee to review compliance concerns in light of telehealth requirements, including HIPAA, Business and Professions Code Section 2290.5, and California Code of Regulations Section 1396.8 in light of the telehealth survey results.
Hello? Hello, thank you. Any other board comment for this motion on the floor? Opening up this motion for public comment, please step forward and have a seat. Thank you. Back to the board. Any other comments from the board?
I have a question, a clarifying question for all this, telehealth stuff. When we say telehealth, we mean both therapy and teleassessment, right?
I missed the last word. You said,
Teleassessments and therapy.
yeah, I would say telehealth across the board.
Okay. Thank you.
Not a problem. Mr. Polk, can you please call the roll?
Kasuga.
Aye.
Fu.
Aye.
Harpsheets.
Aye.
Phillips.
Aye.
Riscate.
Aye.
Rogers.
Aye.
Tate.
Aye.
Motion passes.
Thank you.
I'd like to make a third motion. And the third motion is to assign to the Outreach and Communication Committee via webcast, podcast, newsletter, articles, and social media, to engage in partnerships with stakeholders such as the American Psychological Association, the Association of Black Psychologists, the Association of State and Provincial Psychology Boards, the California Psychological Association, and the Trust regarding practice standards and best practices in light of the results of the telehealth survey.
I second.
Thank you. Any board comment regarding the motion on the floor? Mr. Fu?
Similar to Dr. Kusuga, this applies to all of them. Is there a timeline that the outreach committee would like this done for all three committees? An important question I should have asked before I said yes to two of them. But is there is it 12 months, 6 months? Just curious about the timeline for when a report back to the board should occur.
I would say that whenever the work of the committee is complete, because the task of each committee is a little bit different. So I'm guessing some may take one committee meeting, some may take two committee meetings. It just depends on the workload of the committee assignment. So I would say it just depends. Sorry, that's not really an answer.
No, that's really helpful, and I'm assuming that the expectation is that each committee would at least take this up once next year. Great, thank you.
I would have to say absolutely on that.
So I just wanted to ask, is this list of stakeholders just examples of stakeholders, or
Can we add more to it?
Can we add to it? Specifically, the Association of Regional Centers, ARCA. We can add.
Okay. Perfect. Yeah, this is just a suggested list. So it says such as in the document.
Yeah.
Thank
Just
you.
clarifying. But I think that ARCA would be a good stakeholder to include issues with regards individuals with developmental disabilities.
Thank you for the addition. Any other board comment? I'd like to open up this motion for public comment. Please step forward and have a seat. Thank you. Coming back to the board. Any other board questions or comments on this motion? Mr. Polk, can you please call the roll?
Kusuga.
Aye.
Boo. Aye. Harpsheets.
Aye.
Phillips.
Aye.
Riscate.
Aye.
Rogers.
Aye.
Tate.
Aye.
Motion passes.
Thank you. Wait, raise your hand.
Before I make the fourth motion, who are we assigning the fourth item to? The entire board. Okay. I can now make the motion that we assign to the board providing insight from the survey results for purposes of the board's strategic planning session in December regarding telehealth and future practice issues in light of the results of the telehealth survey.
Second that.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Any board comments or questions regarding this motion? I'd like to open up this motion for public comment. If you do have a public comment, please step forward and have a seat. Coming back to the board, any board comments? Mr. Polk, can you please call the roll?
Kusuga.
Aye.
Boo. Aye. Harpsheets.
Aye.
Phillips.
Aye.
Riscate.
Aye.
Rogers.
Aye.
Tate.
Aye.
Motion passes.
Thank you so much. We're moving on to agenda item number 17, which is the Enforcement Committee report and consideration of committee recommendations. And Dr. Phillips is the chairperson of that committee.
And I think that I'm on, I think, aren't I?
Yes.
Yes, you are.
I don't know how much waving I need to do. I think that Ms. Sorek was going to review the memo, and then I will take the discussion from there.
Included in the meeting materials is a memo from the Enforcement Committee And the committee discussed, as a follow-up to a public comment at our May meeting, the current requirement for 80 hours of active practice in order to qualify as an enforcement expert. The committee discussed the required hours and whether or not a reduction in the hours required to be an expert would be appropriate. What came out of that discussion is the action requested, which is a recommendation to consider adding additional functions to what constitutes the 80 hours of practice instead of reducing the actual numbers to 40 hours. So that is for the board's consideration.
Okay, and I will take it from there. The concern is that we have insufficient experts for purposes of so we're relying only on a group of, I think, 36 experts. So our concern is, how do we make it easier for people to join that group of experts? There was some discussion of the 80 hours versus 40 hours. There was some concern that at 40 hours, someone's not really practicing psychology in a sufficiently full-time or at least half-time manner. It'll be appropriate for them to act as experts. But that if we could add some additional domains to the expert application that would allow us to allow people to better qualify for purposes. And there were some things that occurred to the committee that was Mr. Fu and myself that were not included in the list of things, such as forensic assessments and consulting, industrial organizational consulting, and program development, analysis, and management. That's not an all-inclusive list, but those were some ideas that we had. So we were hoping that the board, if they might have additional ideas of other domains that they might want to add. So I will open that up for discussion.
I move that the board adopts the enforcement committee's recommendation to consider adding additional functions to what constitutes the 80 hours of active practice instead of reducing the number of hours to 40.
And I'll second that.
Do people have ideas as to specific functions that they might want to add to that list?
Participating in professional organizations, would being, say, on a board or committee of professional organizations make a difference?
That would make sense to me.
Sorry, go ahead, Dr. Cruz.
I would add expertise in autism. I think that it's been mentioned before that we have zero, or like, you know, I don't have Ms. Monterrubio right now, but like, I've talked to her before, and there is a need for that expertise.
Would you want to expand that to developmental? I mean,
Sure.
just-
Yeah, we can expand it to someone who has expertise in developmental disabilities, including autism and intellectual disability.
Does the motion include active participation in these activities as qualifying for the 80, to be included in the 80 hours?
Yes.
80
So
hours
we're
of
making the
active.
motion to expand the categories. We're looking for, soliciting from you suggestions as to how that list what that list might include. And then the expert application will be accordingly revised and brought back to the board in final form.
So would you say, where it says here, forensic assessments and consulting, and then industrial organizational consulting, would sort of general consulting with other colleagues, would that fit for you?
Probably not, because it doesn't, I mean, it's a question of what constitutes actual practice in psychology, and I suppose in the broadest sense, it does. Can you expand on that further? As
Well,
to how that
yeah,
would make
let's say somebody offers a consultation group, and other psychologists participate in that group, but this psychologist offers that group, and they're providing consultation. Not supervision, but consultation.
So would you call that psychotherapeutic consultation, or would you call that psychological service consultation?
Yeah, if you say psychotherapeutic consultation, does that imply that you're providing psychotherapy to these other people? Because it's really just, as opposed to supervision, these people are licensed. So, as opposed to group supervision, this is group consultation to licensed professionals.
Well, the
How about if
word,
we said individual and group?
Yeah.
but does that make you a subject matter expert? And that's where we're, oh, go ahead.
I just to excuse me, to anchor the conversation, if you turn to Exhibit A on the following page, under the second bullet point, this is what we have currently listed. So it says psychologists interested in becoming expert reviewer must have an active practice, which is defined as at least 80 hours per month, consisting of direct client services, clinical activity, psychometric testing, supervision, and so we're adding to the second bullet point here for the type of examples which would be included for the purposes of meeting 80 hours. So hopefully that provides an anchor point to how exhaustive the list becomes.
Yeah, that's like a clinical activity, what I was saying. Well, would you consider engagement in a leadership role in a professional organization as fitting into that? It doesn't seem to fit in terms of these categories, but it seems like it could be useful.
I think it could be useful, and it would expand the scope of that work constitute quality. I think it is psychological. So I think we could fashion it. We're getting ideas right now, and what we're going to do then is hammer them into kind of better language, and then we'll bring it back to the board. But
In a list of.
in a list,
In a
yeah.
list, okay.
And it also appears on the application itself, that list of.
So perhaps we should bring it back to the committee with the feedback you guys received today, and then
Exactly.
bring it back to the board after the committee has looked at the revision. So staff can take a stab at an updated expert application, review it with the enforcement committee, and then the enforcement committee can report out on an updated version.
I think that's probably the best way to approach it.
Okay.
And there's a motion, but we're letting it
Or perhaps we want
die on the floor. Dr. Rogers?
I have a separate question, but it is related to the recruitment of experts. In the agenda here, it talks about the ways in which we're recruiting folks through articles in the journal, sending an article to the members, contacting folks through email. Now that we are more forward-facing to the community through going to some of these meetings, is it possible that we can be more targeted around trying to recruit experts in that way as well?
I believe that was
Is that
part of
part
what
of
they
it?
were doing
Okay.
at the meetings. Yeah, yeah.
I will add to what Dr. Phillips just said was part of our discussion and part of the numbers that we're seeing is related to the reputation as a big bad board.
Yes.
And so I think the work that Ms. Chung and Ms. Cochran and Mr. Burke, among many other staff members, are doing is, aside from the actual application that we're talking through here, that reputational work that I think you're referencing is definitely essential and crucial. And so I think what the committee is proposing is to expand the scope for these 80 hours, recognizing that the work of the outreach committee to improve the reputation of the board is a partnership and essential
Yes.
in order for that to happen. So yes, to being at these meetings, and these meetings being specific to less about the actual recruitment and more actually about the board being accessible and a partner to our licensees.
Yes, I totally agree. I was thinking that the more we can have a collaborative relationship, feeling like we are working in partnership with licensees. I think that will do wonders to change that perception. And so I'm really grateful that we have more of a forward-facing presence and we're more interactive now. So I'm hoping that this will shift things over time. Thank you, Mr. Fu.
One of the things that psychologists may not fully appreciate about the work that we do in enforcement, because I think people get so anxious about the potential for some kind of enforcement action against them, they just think of us as being like a police force or something. I think one of the things that we probably need to emphasize is that what we're doing is protecting the value of people's licenses. And that by helping to identify situations in which psychologists are not acting appropriately, we're also protecting the reputation of the field and hence making the integrity of the field and the reputation of the field better. The second thing I will mention is there are some variables that we don't have control over. One of the reluctances people have about becoming board experts is that they would need to testify. And people are very afraid of putting themselves in that kind of situation. So typically, it's a subsection of psychologists that feel comfortable with the idea of being in an adversarial setting where they're testifying as to their opinion. So it's a multi-factor problem, but I think these are things that we can do that will have a much more positive impact on experts, and hopefully at least allow us to not have to rely so often on so few experts, particularly where there may be deficits in terms of fields of expertise.
I remember at the May board meeting where someone brought this issue up, that there are people who are like in semi-retirement, and so they wanted you to consider 40 hours versus 80 hours. And the point they made was that they were bringing in these years of expertise. So could you share with us, maybe, I can hear that the committee felt like, well, yeah, but they're not really fully practicing psychology. That's like 10 hours a week, right? And so could you maybe comment on that?
I think part of it is about the evolution of the field. I think people that are currently engaged in areas of practice tend to be the most credible as expert witnesses, as opposed to people that may have done a lot of evaluations, but they haven't done them for 5 years. And oftentimes during the enforcement proceedings before ALJs, the credibility of experts have been questioned based on the amount of time that's elapsed since they've actually engaged in the field. So in an ideal sense, we'd really like to have people that are currently in the field and actively practicing as much as possible.
I totally get that, but I just felt like we needed to answer that question.
Yeah. And that's not to say that there isn't a well of wisdom among older practitioners who may no longer be actively practicing or only practicing on a very part-time basis. But in terms of our enforcement proceedings, they don't necessarily make the best witnesses.
Dr. Phillips, to follow up on Dr. Harpy's question, would a time-limited addition help meet? We all love, you know how I love to meet people halfway. So, so if, you know, I think if the idea, hearing your concern about the length of time, would it be the case where in the last X number of years, so that you're able to pull in maybe the folks who've been at 40 hours for the last 2 years, but who could still speak credibly to the field in its most present stage, plus or minus 2 years? I'm curious if that addresses the credibility issue, if they are within a 2-year period or however long the board decides.
It's something worth considering, and maybe we want to talk about it more in the enforcement committee, but I think this is a first step to broadening the pool. I do know that administrative law judges do like to discount people that aren't actively practicing, even if they may have only not been actively practicing for a year and a half or 2 years. So just from having observed enough enforcement proceedings over the years, I'd really rather have somebody, I think it would be optimal for us to have people that are actively engaged in the field at the moment that they testify.
Do we need a motion regarding?
Or do we need to withdraw the?
Happy to withdraw.
Thank you. Do we need a new motion regarding taking it back? Nope.
I don't think so.
Okay,
It's just been assigned back to the committee.
okay, perfect. Well,
We
that-
accept.
So we have completed our board business.
Any public comment?
Do I?
Did
I
you?
have to have comments?
I don't, thoughts
We-
on this topic?
You are so right. Let me open up for public comment. That was so inappropriate and rude.
You were just excited for the.
Hi, Dr. Davis. I was excited.
Hi again. I'm really happy to hear you might expand what constitutes 80 hours of practice. That would open up an option for myself, who I spend most of my time doing program development. And I think general consultation would be helpful, not just forensic consultation as part of the, so I'm glad you're opening up the options for those of us who do, I think a lot of psychologists towards the end of their career do a lot of different things. So the wider that can be, and then the expertise in autism, I'm very happy to hear that as well. So, yay.
Any other board comment?
Public.
Public, see what's happening? Any other public comment? It's 5 o'clock. Okay, coming back to the board, so no action for us, but you're going to take this back to the committee.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, so now we have finished our board business, but we, as the board, we're going to go into closed session pursuant to Government Code Section 11126, C3, to discuss disciplinary matters, including petitions for reinstatement, modification or early termination, proposed decisions, stipulations, petitions for reconsideration, and remands. We will not be coming back to open session today. We will see you in the morning at 9:30, but we will be immediately doing roll call and then going right into closed session at 9:30 tomorrow morning. Perfect. Oh. So the board will be staying in this room, and everyone else is excused for the evening. Thank you, and hope to see you tomorrow.
Don't forget to sign out.
Oh. Their credit.
Yeah, I was just going to say you guys get 6 hours of CPD credit under Category 1, attendance at a Board of Psychology meeting. Make sure to notate the date, which is November 2nd, 2023, and the name of today's meeting, which is Board Meeting, and 6 CPD hours. Thank you.
Ms. Mc-